Hi, I'm Brother Guy Consolmagno. I'm the director of the Vatican Observatory, a Jesuit brother, and a scientist, a planetary scientist. You're probably not surprised to learn that I have no problem living a life of science and a life of faith, but I'm going to make a stronger statement today. I'm going to say that my science actually is an act of worship. I want to explain what I mean by that, and to put it into a little bit of a context, I remind you that this month is when a number of spacecraft are approaching planet Mars. And a friend of mine was involved both in these upcoming missions and also in a past mission, gave this really interesting talk a few years ago about his experience looking at Mars.
Our last storyteller is Steve Collins, and Steve is the attitude control manager on MER. Actually, until this morning, I didn't have any idea what Steve was going to talk about, and when he told me uh, the difference between abstract and reality for him, I think you're going to find his story very, very interesting.
Thank you, Farouz. I'm actually just one of the many ACS engineers. Kind of our boss is Miguel San Martin. I wanted to tell you a story today about an event that happened a few weeks after the two landings. I'm an attitude control system engineer. I'm responsible for the gyros and the thrusters and the software that keeps the spacecraft or the rover pointed in the right direction. And as such, I live in this world of numbers. And sometimes it's hard to go from those numbers to the picture of what the spacecraft is doing. But that's kind of the job, is to figure out from the numbers, what direction is the spacecraft pointed today? So a few weeks after the landings, we were kind of in a groove at that point. We were living on Mars time, and so we were coming in at weird hours and not sleeping very well. And so it was the middle of the night, and I was in the control room. I was just coming off shift, and somebody, one of the other engineers, came by the console and kind of just, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Go up to the 6th floor and check out the pictures." And then, he kind of went away, and it was kind of like it was a secret, or something special. And so I went up once I got off shift, I went up to the 6th floor to the UN Conference Center. That's what a lot of you know, the room I'm talking about. It's this large conference room where the science working group makes their, argues about who's going to do what with the rover the next day. And it has a big U-shaped table and microphones at all of the chairs, and it looks like the UN Conference Center. One of the things that they have in there is this high-resolution projection TV that's like, goes onto a screen 15 feet wide. And so I go in there, and the place is dark. It only gets used a few hours a day when the science team is making all these critical decisions about the rover planning. But so I go in there, and it's dark, and it's quiet, and there's a picture up on this big high-resolution screen. And you can't really make it out. And you can't really make it out because it's in 3D. And it's in the fancy kind of 3D, not the red-green glasses kind, but the kind that takes a set of special electronic glasses. And when you put them on, you can see the picture in color, in the actual natural color, but it's in 3D. And so I go in there and I step to the center of the room in the middle of this big U-shaped table, and there's a pair of glasses there on the table, and I put them on, and I'm standing on the surface of Mars. You can roll the clip that we have of this. And what I'm looking at is a color, high-resolution panorama of the Spirit landing site, and it's in 3D, and off in one corner I can see Sleepy Hollow, which is a sand trap that we decided we wanted to be careful and not drive into, and the thing slowly pans around, and as it pans around you can see there where the airbags have been, drawn back up and left scrape marks in the soil. And then we pan around a little bit farther, and off in the distance, there's a line of mountains you can see, and as it goes farther, you can see the whole expanse of the Columbia Hills out in the distance. And it's like changed from being a set of numbers, on these telemetry screens to being a place. It's a place. And I'm thinking, I wonder if we could drive the rover all the way over to the Columbia Hills. Could we possibly do that? I sat there in the dark by myself for maybe 20 minutes and just, let this panorama scroll by and, thought about, holy cow, look at what we've done. It's a place. That's the view that an astronaut is going to see when they step out onto the surface of Mars for the first time. So I went back downstairs to the MSA and tapped my buddy Tony, who had just replaced me on shift, and I told him, when you get a chance, when you have a chance for a break, go up to the 6th floor and check out the pictures.
Well, I can't give you the 3D version of it, but I can show you a little bit of what it looks like to be standing on the surface of Mars. Mars is a place. It's a place no different in some sense from the planet we're on. And it's just one of countless planets that we already know exist in the universe. We've discovered 4,000 planetary systems, and we've just started looking for them. This is to remind you that the universe is bigger than just your classroom, just the distance between you and the refrigerator, just, what's for lunch. And this is a universe that you can see for yourself if you take the moment to look. You can go outside at night and see a red star that, if you know where you're looking, you can recognize that's actually planet Mars. That's where the rover is that took these images. All of these images were taken from the surface of Mars. These are not something out of a movie. These are reality. Human beings have been there and left our trash on the surface. And we can study it with the same rules of geology that you learn in your geology classes. That sense of pulling yourself out of where you are and seeing both the familiar and the unusual everywhere is what I call an act of worship. Prayer is first of all being aware of something bigger than yourself, being willing to be surprised by something bigger than yourself, but also being willing to become used to viewing the universe in a different perspective than one that is just focused entirely on yourself and your own fears and your own needs and your own worries and what is for lunch. Because there's a heck of a universe out there, just waiting for us to see it, just waiting for us to participate in it, just waiting for us to walk across these stony grounds as geologists in some future day, when we land ourselves on the surface of Mars, or orbit over its surface and see some amazing and fabulous bits of geology. I remember a friend of mine who, when he was a geology student, he was brought out by his professor to look at a series of rock layers like this one on Mars. And the professor was explaining it to him, and he says, until the professor pointed out all the individual layers and how they fit together into this geological story of which layer came first, which process occurred next, It just looked like a jumble to him. But he trusted the professor enough to finally follow the logic. But he said to me, you know, if I hadn't believed it, I would never have seen it. You've heard seeing is believing. It's also true, believing is seeing. Finding God in the beauty and order of the physical universe is easy if you already believe in God and you expect to find God there. It's almost impossible if you don't believe already. But looking at this sunset on Mars, I'm reminded of a fabulous prayer of worship, a poem by St. Francis, Laudato Si. Be praised, my Lord, through all your creatures, especially through my Lord brother sun, who brings the day, and you give light through him, and he is beautiful and radiant in his splendor. Of you most high he bears the likeness. Be praised, my Lord, through sister moon, and through the stars. In the heavens you make them bright, precious, and beautiful. A place where stars are being born, which our imagination can also look at and see a unicorn. A place where stars are being born. This is, of course, a Hubble image. Be praised, my Lord, through brother fire, through whom you brighten the night. He is beautiful and cheerful and powerful and strong. Be praised, my Lord, through brothers wind and air, fair and stormy, all weathers moods, by which you cherish all you've made. I took this picture myself in Antarctica, where we had camped out to go searching for meteorites, and then a snowstorm came along. Be praised, my Lord, through sister water, useful and humble and precious and pure. That's planet Saturn. That's a real image taken by a spacecraft, the Cassini spacecraft, that happened to go behind the planet. So the sun is on the other side of the planet, blocked out by the planet, but you can see the dust orbiting the planet. And if you look carefully, there's a little dot in the dust. And what is that dot looking back towards the sun? Be praised, my Lord, through our sister, Mother Earth. Now, there is a temptation to divide our experience into separate categories, emotions versus logic, or faith versus science. It's a false division. Real people are not, just Kirk or just Spock. Heck, even Kirk and Spock were not really all Kirk or all Spock. And we have to live with others who themselves are also more than Kirk or Spock. It's on the basis of both reason and gut feeling that we make all the decisions of our life. To some people it means choosing between science and religion, but that's, crazy. I've lived with both all my life. How can you choose one or the other? What are you thinking of? Why would you even think you had to make such a choice? Oddly enough, it was Captain Kirk who helped me understand the dilemma. Now, how I wound up actually talking to William Shatner, the actor who played Captain Kirk, is a long story, too long to go into here. But, I described myself to him as a Jesuit scientist, and he was flabbergasted. A Jesuit and a scientist? Wait a minute, he goes. And as we talked, it suddenly became clear to me, something obvious to him, but I'd never grasped before. He saw religion and science as two competing sets of truths, two big books of facts. And what happens if the facts in one book contradicts the facts in the other? But science isn't a big book of facts. Maybe that's how we teach it to you in high school. But that's like thinking that playing music is nothing more than practicing scales. Let me give you an example. The orbits of the planets are facts. Okay. You could describe them using Ptolemy's epicycle, circles within circles all going around the Earth. Or you can describe them using Kepler's ellipses, which are, a shape going around the sun. Both descriptions can be tweaked to give equally accurate descriptions of the orbits. Those are the facts. But only one of them, Kepler's ellipses, leads to the insight of Newton's law of gravity. In other words, it's not the facts of the orbit, it's what you do with the facts. And it's also being open to the realization that Newton's laws actually themselves are not the last word. This is a book on gravitation. It's actually a book on general relativity. And not even Einstein's general relativity, which has replaced Newton, is the last word. This book I used when I was in college, it's 30 years out of date. You know, the science of 3021 is going to look real different from the science we're teaching today, because science isn't just a book of facts. And likewise, our faith is not based on rigid certainties. I told William Shatner a phrase that I had heard from Anne Lamott. She used this phrase to describe faith. The opposite of faith isn't doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. And that was completely the opposite of what he thought faith was about. He'd heard that phrase, blind faith, and thought it just meant accepting something as certain without looking, or even worse, closing your eyes to the facts, proceeding on emotion. That's not faith. Remember what Moses says to his people after giving them the tablets of the law. He says, "Do not forget the things your eyes have seen. Do not let them fade from your heart as long as you live. Teach them to your children and to their children after them." It's not close your eyes, but rather teach what you have seen. Every religious experience begins with an experience, which is data, if you will. Blind faith isn't walking around with blindfolds, blinding yourself to the truth. It's proceeding after you've done everything you can to see and still can't see everything, because even when you're blind, even when you can't see, even when you don't really know all the data, you still have to proceed. If we knew the answer, we wouldn't need faith. Certainty is the opposite of faith. And if we knew the answer, we wouldn't look at those rocks and begin to imagine in our head what was going on to make the rocks we see. Because the fact is, we don't ever know all the facts. And so faith is how we deal with the fact that you have to proceed anyway. Make choices about, where are you going to go to university? What career are you going to pursue? Where are you going to marry? Where are you going to live? All of these things are making crucial decisions based on inadequate information. It's a leap of faith to start a family, or to join a religious community, or to move to a new home, or a new city, or a new country. Did I choose the right school? Did I choose the right subject to study? Did I choose the right thesis topic? We all make these decisions based on inadequate data, and it's the same in our science. Is my approach going to be worth the several years it's going to take to, work on my thesis only to find out I screwed up and chose the wrong topic? At the end of the day, is all my work going to be worthwhile to me or to anyone else in the field? You don't know until you've done it. Faith even has a deeper significance. Science is a system of logic. But every logical system has to start out with axioms, starting points that you accept on faith. I can identify 3 axioms you have to accept on faith before you can do science. And actually, they're axioms that depend on your religion. You have to believe in reality. The universe exists. It's not just a dream. I'm not just a butterfly dreaming that I'm a philosopher. Second, if you're going to go looking for the laws of nature, you have to believe that nature follows laws, that they're there to be found. We accept that now because the system works, but who was the first person to think of that? It's not obvious that nature is going to follow laws and not maybe be the whims of some nature gods. And third and most important, if you're going to be a scientist spending your life studying the physical universe, you have to believe it's worthwhile to spend your time and your fortune to do that. In the communities of the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims, we are all given explicit support for the study of creation as a religious act. Think of Genesis, chapter 1. It starts, in the beginning, God. God's already there. God is not a nature god like Zeus. God is a supernatural God outside of creation. Creation is described in a systematic way, step by step, as inevitable as day follows night. That tells us there is a system. Its working is not the collection of a bunch of arbitrary whims of nature deities. And even more striking, we're told at every step that creation is good. The Creator isn't some spiritual entity saying, oh, you should rise above this inherently evil and sinful existence. Chocolate is out there to lure you into acting. No. Creation is inherently good. Chocolate is a foretaste of heaven. We are told how creation is made in a very orderly way that, is set up like the week. And the 6 days are very necessary bits of creation. And we see all the things that we have to do in creation to produce, to prepare, to distribute food, shelter, clothing. Those are all good. But the activity of the seventh day is the goal of the Genesis story. And the seventh day is contemplating nature as a way of engaging the Creator. And that is a form of prayer. The lesson to be learned here is a reminder that the human being is more than just an animal who only lives to eat and reproduce. We do not live by bread alone. The lesson is that the spiritual and intellectual aspects of the human person is the pinnacle of what makes us human. The Genesis story of creation makes these activities and contemplating cosmology as a science. It makes it possible because it says there are rules. It makes it licit because it says this is good. And it makes it encouraged because we're told this is the goal of who we are as human beings, not just well-fed cows. Science is itself an element of the common good. God made us to be astronomers. So, if my faith supports science, how then does doing science contribute to my faith? I find in science 3 important lessons. First, it reminds me that the universe matters. Our lives matter. Good and evil in our daily life matters. We can't say, oh, what happens on earth doesn't matter. We're all destined for heaven. No. Socrates could die peacefully because he thought there was an immortal soul. Jesus wept at the prospect of his death. This universe, we're told, is so precious and so important that God sent his only Son to rescue it. We're told in science that the universe is beautiful, unexpectedly, unreasonably, indescribably beautiful. Beauty is fundamental to both the creation and the Creator. I can use the relative elegance of competing theories to choose which is the one I think is more likely to bring me closer to the truth. But beauty can't be quantified or calculated. It takes a human soul to recognize it. And finally, my science reminds me that the universe is fun. I see in the creation the personality of the Creator. God has a very distinctive, recognizable personality, including a wicked sense of humor that makes clouds that look like horses. Thanks a whole lot, and open now to questions.
Brother Guy Consolmagno is our guest tonight. Brother Guy is an American research astronomer, physicist, Jesuit religious brother, director of the Vatican Observatory, and president of the Vatican Observatory Foundation. He's a native of Detroit, Michigan, and earned an undergraduate and master's degree from MIT, a PhD in planetary science from the University of Arizona. He was a postdoctoral research fellow at Harvard and MIT, served in the U.S. Peace Corps, and taught university physics at Lafayette College before entering the Jesuits in 1989. Along with more than 200 scientific publications, he's the author of a number of popular books, including Turn Left at Orion with Dan Davis, and most recently, my favorite, Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? I think actually Pope Francis issued guidance on that a few years ago. He's also hosted science programs for BBC Radio 4, been interviewed in numerous documentary films, appeared on The Colbert Report, and for more than 10 years has written the monthly science column for the British Catholic magazine, The Tablet. Brother Guy's work has taken him to every continent on Earth. For example, in 1996, he spent 6 weeks collecting meteorites with a NASA team on the blue ice regions of East Antarctica. He served on the governing boards of the Meteoritical Society, I think I pronounced that right, the American Astronomical Society Division for Planetary Sciences, and the AIU Commission 16. In 2000, the Small Bodies Nomenclature Committee, this is a cool fact, of the AIU named an asteroid 4597 Consolmagno in recognition of his work. And in 2014, he received the Carl Sagan Medal from the American Astronomical Society Division for Planetary Sciences for excellence in public communication in planetary sciences. So this is our format for tonight, guys. We sent out the video to a recorded lecture that Brother Guy delivered for us on the topic of science as an act of worship, right? Science as an act of worship. And so because we've viewed the lecture already and got a good sense of the foundation of Brother Guy's argument and his explorations for us, what we want to do is offer this as an opportunity to actually engage in conversation, right? We've had some great conversations in this series, like with Sister Ilya, and I think we want to open up a robust space for that conversation here tonight. I know you all have study hall around 8 o'clock. We'll try to have you off for house meeting by about 7:40. So that gives us about 30 or 40 minutes to have some good conversation. So without further ado, Brother Guy, thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here, and I look forward to hearing from you guys.
So I'll kick us off with a question to get things rolling, and then I'm going to turn it over to you all. When you want to ask a question, there's too many of you to see your hand raised or to know. So just unmute yourself and just start talking, and then and that's how you can best ask the question, I think, unless there's a more civilized way. But that's I found to be quite effective. So here's my question to kind of get things rolling, Brother Guy. You talk about science as an act of worship. And we have a lot of students here. We have a new science building. We have a great science program here. We have a number of students who I'm sure will go and study science at college. And in fact, this series that we're hosting is under the auspice of the Center for Science and the Liberal Arts, right? We focus on the liberal arts here. We have a great liberal arts education, and a lot of the students go and study either research or do liberal arts in college. So I'm kind of wondering if you might speak a little bit, Brother Guy, to the relationship between science and the liberal arts, and maybe can science be a liberal art? And what is a liberal art?
Right. Absolutely, science is a liberal art. I'll start with a little story to give you a sense of where I'm coming from. When I was 30 years old, I'd been a postdoc at MIT. I was doing, top level research as, basically I was a utility infielder, but I was in the big leagues. And yet I go home at night wondering, why am I worried about research on the moons of Jupiter when people are starving in the world? And I didn't have an answer for that, which is why I quit my job and went into the Peace Corps. And when I went to Africa, I discovered that people were starving in Africa, and certainly the teaching I was doing would help raise the educational level of the country. But that wasn't what people wanted from me. They wanted me to show off this telescope, the very telescope that's behind me. I took with me to Africa, and they wanted to look through it and see, the craters on the moon. They wanted to see the rings of Saturn. These were people in rural Africa, but they were people. And if you're a human being, you're hungry for more than what fills your stomach, even though you do need that. You're hungry also for something to fill your soul. It's literally true that we do not live by bread alone. If you starve somebody the chance to understand the universe that they're in, you're denying them something of their humanity. Now, I'm going to tell you something, as someone who's taught high school and someone who's taught university. As you heard, I taught Lafayette College. I've taught at a number of Jesuit schools. The science that you learn in high school doesn't do you very much good in your science courses at university. That's not why you're studying it in high school. I'll be even more bold. The most important classes that you're going to take right now in high school, if you want to be a scientist, are writing, because you spend all of your life writing, and public speaking. because if you can't communicate your ideas to other people, you might just as well never have had them. And to go along with that is art, to be able to present and know how to set up. The most useful thing, I swear, that I learned in high school was how to lay out a page on the high school yearbook, because half of the papers given at scientific meetings today are posters. And that's where you learn those skills. And they were not going to learn those skills at MIT. Trust me, I was there. So it's writing, knowing how to write fast and how to write accurately and how to write so that people will understand you and remember what you're saying, to know how to speak in public because you spend most of your life doing it. Those are the skills you learn. And those are language skills. I was a classics major. I did Latin and Greek. I didn't do the advanced sciences when I was in high school. I did math, I did calculus, but I didn't do any of the AP physics. And when I taught physics at the university, the kids who had, they took AP physics, so they were in the next class. That wasn't the problem. But the kids who were just doing the regular physics classes, whatever they had learned got them through the first 4 weeks of undergraduate physics. And there's a reason for that I don't need to go into. So why do you have a science center at your high school? Why did you invest in all of that? It's because what you can learn in high school physics and high school chemistry is the culture of the science, not the science itself. Any of you guys studied Shakespeare? When you study Shakespeare in English, they aren't teaching you how to write, iambic pentameter. When you're studying physics in college, they're teaching the equivalent of how to write iambic pentameter because they're teaching you how to be a physicist. But when you take the high school sciences, they're teaching you what science is. And those things remain true for the rest of your life, whether you go into science or not. Because science is that liberal art that allows you to see the universe in a different way, just as learning how to express yourself in a different language forces you to think in a different way. Because every language has a different set of vocabulary words, including words that we don't have the equivalent for in English, and a different grammar, including grammar structures that we don't have in English, to allow you to think in a different way, to allow you to have more than one way of attacking the universe. I could go on for the rest of the hour, but I'll quit there.
That's great. Thank you. All right, folks, feel free to unmute yourself and pipe up and ask a question. I know at least my students, you have plenty of them that we've shared together. So feel free to unmute and go for it.
Mr. Fisher, can I go?
Yep.
Please, yeah,
You're on.
Go for it.
So in your lecture, you mentioned that there are like a lot of false assumptions and like contradictions within science and how we keep learning and like we're going to get to the truth eventually, or at least that's like the goal of science. And that's also the goal of religion and philosophy is to like find the truth. But it's also true that multiple religions like tend to contradict each other in the way that our scientific discoveries do. Do you think we found the answer in religion? Like, do you think we found it, or do you think we're all still working towards it? Do you think all religions are working towards that common truth? And do you think we found it?
Fantastic question. Really gets to the heart of what I think is the big difference, one of the big differences between science and faith. Science is invented by human beings. And so it's a human construction that tries to approach the truth of the reality of nature. And we're never going to get there, but we always get closer. Knowledge is like an island. My dad told me this years ago when he was driving to high school every morning. Knowledge is like an island. The more you know, the bigger your island. But the bigger the island, the longer the shoreline that divides what you know with what you don't know. So the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And that's why when you come across somebody who thinks he knows everything, it's because his island is really tiny. He actually knows almost nothing. Because the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. So science is human understanding, which in theory, any other human could be able to understand because a human invented it, approaching but never reaching truth. Religion is kind of the opposite. You start with truths, but they're not understood. And you spend your life going through saying, oh, that's what that means. And then 5 years later, you go back and you go, oh, that's really what that means. And, until I had experienced this, I wouldn't have known what they were talking about when they said that. And it never ends. The best description I can think of in the relationship between, the theologian, the religious person, and God is a relationship of love. My parents were married for 72 years. My dad lived to be 100, my mom to 96. They died within a few months of each other. To the very last moment, they were learning new things about each other because their spouse was not a problem that they were trying to solve, but someone who they were always trying to get closer to. The physical universe is not a problem I'm trying to solve. It's not a truth that will wind up in a book. Another example, to give you one, is music. Mozart wrote these notes. They're on a piece of paper to be played on the piano, and you can learn how to play all the notes. But, if I were to play those notes, it wouldn't sound like you playing all those notes. It wouldn't sound like Rudolf Serkin playing those notes. And Rudolf Serkin playing those notes in a recording made in 1948 is different from him playing those notes in a recording made in 1962, because his understanding of the music changes. And it's not that one is better than the other, just that one is different from the other. When you're learning physics in high school or in college, you're learning how to play scales. They make you answer problems to get to the right answer in the back of the book, not because the right answer in the back of the book is truth, but that is just to let you know, have I got it? Am I on the right track? A wise man said about mathematics, but I think it is also true of physics. You never understand it, you just get used to it. And that's our goal, is to get more and more used to being in God's presence, get more and more used to the way the physical universe works, knowing that we'll never have it perfectly. And that is the joy of many religions, because they are people starting with different assumptions, all essentially trying to climb the same mountain. And I was thinking to myself, looking at this class, I hope among you and your friends, you know some atheists, because to be an atheist is better than to believe in a false God. And there are a lot of false gods out there. I only believe in one more God than an atheist. I'm not that far from it, because there are a lot of bad ideas that it's worth taking your time to get past, to get beyond. But don't stop. Keep looking. At the end of the day, what we're looking for is truth. I'll end with one totally different riff, but I think it builds on what you're saying. Have you heard of something called Pascal's wager? You ever heard of this?
We're going to be studying it.
Pascal was
3 days.
Okay. Pascal had this goofy idea. He says, either there's a God or there isn't a God. So if there is a God and I believe in God, hey, I've won. If there's not a God and I don't believe in God, even though it turns I'm right, what does it get me? Because if I believe in God and it turns out there isn't one, I'm no worse off or no better off. On the other hand, if there is a God and I don't believe in him, then boy, am I screwed. So obviously, to win the wager, you believe in God, because you can't lose and you might win. The fascinating thing about Pascal's wager is how utterly lousy it is, how totally unsatisfying it is. What it sounds and smells and feels like a cheat, because it is. Because built into that is nothing about what is true, and even deeper built into that is nothing about what is love. And the fact that it seems to be clever, but it doesn't work, is the real benefit. Because it makes you appreciate in your soul that truth is more important than being clever. that love is more important than being clever. And there's a route to where you actually find God. God is truth. God is love. And oh, where have I read that before?
Hi, Father. Has there ever been a point in your life where you felt as though your faith and scientific findings have ever conflicted? And if so, how have you resolved this within yourself?
It's never happened. And it has never happened in part because they don't talk about the same things. They're on parallel levels, but the faith is the meta thing that supports the science. What has happened, and happens not nearly often enough, is that this one piece of science that I really believe contradicts this other piece of science that I really believe. And when that happens, I get really excited because it means I'm about to learn something new, something that I didn't know before. I'm going to get a paper out of this, even if it's just to present the contradiction, because this gets people excited. But if I can, find my way towards resolving the contradiction, all the better. So finding these points of conflict is something you actually look forward to, you strive towards, because it means you're about to learn something new. And it goes back to what Hannah was asking, which is, do you ever think you've got the truth? If you think you've got the truth, you don't. As why my quantum physics professor used to say, if you think you understand quantum physics, then you don't. It's something you get used to. It's not something that you have, got the answer in the back of the book, solve that one. Nope. Any more than you would say, well, I played that piece of music perfectly, I'll never have to play it again. Nope, that's not how it works. Have there ever been times when I've had doubts in my faith? Of course. That's essential to faith. There was a great theologian, Paul Tillich, who wrote an entire paper on the role of doubt in faith. But his ideas were actually summarized by a pop religion writer, Anne Lamott, who put it in one sentence. She goes, the opposite of faith isn't doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. If you think you have it for sure, then you don't need faith. What's the point of faith? The opposite of love is certainty. If you could create a robot, a robot boyfriend who did everything you wanted, that wouldn't be love. It's because at any given moment, this person, whoever it is that you're in love with, could decide to walk away. That makes the fact that they don't walk away all the more special. Whether it's, somebody you're dating or your parents or a child or a friend, anytime when there is that need for faith, then it's all the richer every moment that you spend where they have decided to stay to be your friend. Even especially when they've got every reason to walk away because you screwed up somehow. And we all do that. So,
Father, may I ask a question?
Go for it.
So I thought this quote from your lecture was really striking when you said that it's not just seeing is believing, but also believing is seeing. And I was wondering, as someone who kind of is in both the faith field and the science field, do you ever feel like you're leaning towards full right out scientism or right out biblicism kind of?
Both of those are silly enough that I know to avoid them. But there are subtle versions of those which can creep in, and they can creep in odd ways. And because they're subtle, you might get fooled by them. Let me give you an example. You read about the Big Bang Theory and you go, this is a fabulous description. The universe starts with let there be light. Oh, the Big Bang is the light in let there be light. Oh my gosh, whoever wrote Genesis was actually talking about the Big Bang. No, they weren't. It's real easy to slip into that. And then to say, oh, can I be clever? Like the second day is really, and the third day is really evolution. And no, you become so enamored with your own cleverness in doing those sorts of things that you miss the message of Genesis, which I talked about, was that we are made to spend a Sabbath contemplating God. That's the message of Genesis, and trying to make one-to-one analogies to turning it into something that it wasn't. If you read Lord of the Rings, you're familiar with it at least, you've seen the movie. Okay, Lord of the Rings was written during World War II. And everybody reading Lord of the Rings in the early 50s when it came out said, oh, the ring with all the power, but in fact it's evil. He's talking about nuclear energy. It is so easy to jump into that trap. Well, he wrote the damn ring long before he knew about nuclear energy. It had nothing to do with nuclear energy and the bomb. It's very easy to fall into trying to use science to explain my religion, or trying to use religion to explain my science, rather than letting both of them live and breathe to where they need to go and to what they need to do, and let them inform each other, but not explain or do away with each other. Pope John Paul II wrote about this in a letter to my predecessor, George Coyne. It's worth trying to find online. And he has a phrase in there, which is marvelous, which is something to the effect of, science and religion must each be given the freedom of their discipline to go where they need to go. But science can keep religion from superstition, and religion can keep science from false absolutes. To recognize that each of them are a part of the human experience, but there's more to God than religion. There's more to the universe than science. Religion is there to get us to God, but religion is not the God itself. We don't worship our religion. We worship God. Science is there to give us an understanding of the universe. But while it's fun to be able to go out and look at the stars and recognize red giants and know the science behind them, it's also fun to go out and look at the stars and recognize that they happen to be beautiful. And you don't want to lose either one of those things. Does that answer your question? Or does it go in odd ways you hadn't even thought of?
I think that makes a lot of sense. And on that note, what do you think, what's your stance on the relationship between faith and reason? Do you think they're equal, or that they need each other?
In archaeotologos, I told you I learned Greek. That's the Greek of the opening sentence of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the word for word is logos, which is where we get the word logic. So imagine if you were to translate that. In the beginning was logic, and logic was with God, and logic was God. In the beginning was reason, and reason was with God, and reason was God. But every logical system has to start with an axiom. It has to start with an assumption. And every logical step is a little burst of insight. And those are things that live beyond logic, but infuse logic with spirit. Oh, that's really good. I ought to write that down and use that someplace. Go ahead.
In your lecture, you talk a lot about Mars and space. So do you think that God intended for us to venture off of Earth and study other worlds, or to stay grounded here and make the best out of what we're given and what we have now?
But what we're given are the other worlds. That blue sky overhead, or that cloudy sky overhead, depending on what it is not an impenetrable barrier. Things come through it to touch us, asteroids, meteorites. We go through it. God is good at putting barriers so that we have to reach a certain level before we can, cross those barriers. God has given us the ability to craft the universe so that we can cross those barriers. And I don't think crafting the universe is an evil thing, because what was Jesus? Son of a carpenter himself. He was a techie. He was, a first century techie, but he was a techie. The word techne described in Greek the kind of work that a carpenter did. Of course, the other thing I joke about Jesus being a techie, you know what a techie is, some nerd. So techie is somebody who lives with his mother till he's 30 and doesn't have a girlfriend, and tries to save the world, and people kill him for his efforts. So yeah, Jesus was a techie that way too. I'm joking about that part. But I'm not joking about the part of Jesus knowing that you can fashion the universe to do good. When he cures people, sometimes he says, you're cured, and he doesn't even have to show up. But sometimes he goes through the motion of making mud and putting it on the blind man's eyes to show that physically manipulating the universe to do good is a good thing. We have to make our God big enough that God embraces the entire universe, including whatever aliens we find eventually, if we ever do, or if they find us.
I have
That's
a
my
question.
answer.
I have a question sort of relating to that. So I just read an article about Father Jose, who was the director of the Vatican Observatory when this was written back in 2008. And in it, he was talking about the possibility of there being life on Mars. And if there was life on Mars, that whatever sort of being that was there might not have needed any sort of saving, as we did from Jesus, because
we don't know
to fall. So I just wondering what you thought about that.
I've got a whole book about it called "Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial?" And Jose is he's gone back to Argentina. He's at a university there, and he's developed a think tank to expressly talk about what religion looks like when you recognize you're in a universe that's more than just planet Earth. I think that's probably the easiest way to put it. Anything is possible. What do we have as examples? We have human beings who were given the possibility to not sin, but chose to. We also have in our mythos, which is not to say that it's true or false, but it's part of our culture, the idea of angels. What do we know about angels? They're creatures, they're created by God. They were given a choice to do good or to do evil, and we know the outcome. Now, do I think that angels are actually, creatures and with wings and white robes? And for all I know, they are, because I know I don't know. Probably not. Probably there's more to it than that. And all the words are nothing more than symbols for a concept that our little brains can't handle. But it shows that within our own culture, we accept the possibility of creations of God who are given a free choice and choose not to reject God. It's possible. Does it happen? I don't know. If we were to find a race that never fell, how would we know they had the free will, that they didn't have to? Interesting question. The laws of physics, we assume, operate everywhere in the universe. We also assume that the laws of good and evil and right and wrong are the same. If you have a creature that has intellect, they're aware that they exist, they're aware that somebody else exists, and they have free will. They can choose to love or to ignore. Then they're going to be open to the same temptations as somebody who, wants to build an airplane to, go skydiving or build an airplane to drop bombs. And the literature that treats on this, we call science fiction. And really good science fiction gets it right in that you read it and you go, yeah, that's the way that human beings behave. I believe that. And bad science fiction shoves their cardboard characters around for some preconceived, preordained ending that, they had to come to by the end of the TV show. And we know the difference. When a show gets it right and when it gets it wrong. So that's precisely why we have science fiction, to make ourselves think about more than our day-to-day lives, so that when we go back to our day-to-day lives, we suddenly see things we didn't see before. That's why that's a great question. I've got a question. Is this, an all-female school? How come I haven't heard from any of the guys?
Could I ask a question, actually?
Please do.
All right. With technological advancements such as CRISPR allowing gene editing, where does Catholicism draw the line when it comes to humans playing God?
It's a tough question. There's a thing called the Pontifical Academy of Sciences that has 120 scientists, most of them Nobel Prize winners. But the director of the Vatican Observatory gets to sit in on them so long as he's the director. So I've been in their meetings. And this is an issue that has come up more than once at meetings of the Pontifical Academy, trying to decide. I'll give you a bigger and more general answer. There was a book that I had to study as a philosophy student, learning to be a Jesuit, called The Abuse of Casuistry. And one of the authors, Stephen Tolman, is a professional ethicist. And in the introduction to the book, he tells a story which I remember more than I remember most anything else in the book. He talks about, as someone who has this profession, does ethics, he was asked to sit on a panel at a hospital where they would judge whether or not certain treatments would be allowed. And these were treatments on people who could not give informed consent. Maybe they're unconscious and you want to know, can I try this treatment to get them out of their unconsciousness? Or maybe they're children and, you can't ask a 10-year-old to make these kinds of decisions. So you have a group of people who understand ethics to be able to tell the doctors, yes, you can go ahead and do that, or no, I don't think you should. When he went into the room, this actually goes back to a question somebody else asked about different religions. When he went into the room with the rest of the panel, he realized there was somebody of every ethical system and every religion you could imagine. And he's looking around the table and he's going, we're not even going to agree on what table to sit at. How can this ever work? But in reality, virtually every decision that they had to make was made quickly and easily and unanimously. No two of them would explain why they came to that decision. They would argue about the method. But for most questions, it was obvious. Yes, of course you can do that. No, you can't do that. And in between were hard decisions that everybody agreed were hard decisions because they could see both sides of it. And the world is like that. At the end of the day, you cannot come up with a calculus of ethics. You can come up with rules of thumb, but as soon as you come up with a rule of thumb, I can come up with an exception that goes, well, maybe not. For instance, rule of thumb when it comes to genetic manipulation of human beings. If it's to prevent them from getting a genetic disease, yeah, sounds good. If it's to give them superpowers to make them Superman, I don't think so. That sounds bad. If you're going to make them tall so that your child will become a basketball player, I think that's probably a bad thing to do. All right. Do you know anybody who's lactose intolerant? They can't eat milk because it makes them, do bad things to their digestive system. Actually, the ability to digest milk as an adult is a genetic flaw. Most human beings, most mammals don't have that. It just happened that, people in certain cultures that were short of food and had to keep drinking milk even beyond the time when there should have been for children, managed to survive. And so that genetic flaw was incorporated into the people, but it's a genetic flaw like sickle cell anemia is a genetic flaw. Does that mean that we should cure the people who can eat ice cream as adults because they're genetically flawed? Or does it mean that they have a superpower? Or, suddenly you realize that our simple rule of thumb comes into a hard case where you're not so sure what the answer is. You're in a gray zone. Welcome to the gray zone. Because here's the thing. You're going to have to make those decisions in your life, and sometimes you're going to get them wrong, even with the best of intentions, and people will get hurt, even with the best of intentions, and you're going to have to live with it. It's called being alive. And part of what Catholicism brings to the table is the ability to be able to say, guess what, I was wrong. Guess what, I was wrong. And actually, I probably should have known better, but I was clever enough to talk myself into it when later on I wished I hadn't. And I can ask God for forgiveness. It's odd, of all the sacraments, the sacrament of asking for forgiveness is the most unpopular because nobody wants to admit they were wrong. But the most glorious thing of being able to admit you're wrong is to hear God saying, I love you anyway. The most important thing in a relationship with somebody you're dating is to be able to have an argument and then make up afterwards. Next.
I have a
Kaylee.
quick question.
Okay, Kaylee's in front of me first. So,
Okay.
Sorry, I have a question regarding the different ways that we could possibly read the Bible, including like literally, metaphorically, anagogically. Which way how do you know which way to read it, and how does that connect to what we know about science in general?
a lot of it is knowing what are you trying to get out of it. If you're trying to learn the lesson of a story, you buy into the story. You give it a willing suspension of disbelief. There isn't actually a place called Hogwarts. But if you spend the entire time reading Harry Potter and refusing to believe in Hogwarts, you're going to miss everything the story can tell you. And there's more than one layer of things that you can get. And then at the end of the day, you're going to read a gospel passage and you're going to wonder, was this, somebody writing symbolism, or was this something that actually happened? And the answer is, in one sense, I don't know. So I'm not going to be too quick to judge people who are going to read it one way or the other. But I do know, in order to get the reason the story was, the Star of Bethlehem. Was the Star of Bethlehem an actual description of science? Or was it a symbolic way of saying Jesus was, a more important than the emperor? At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Because the message that Jesus is more important than the emperor is true. And for all I know, it could have been a real star, because there's nothing in it that's impossible. There are certain things that are essential, the stuff you find in the Apostles' Creed. If you aren't willing to start with that, then the rest of Scripture isn't going to make sense. But beyond that, you have to be willing to accept that it might be the one, or it might be. Now, as a scholar, you can begin to read after a while. Every book in the Old Testament of a prophet begins by telling you what the prophet's name was, when he lived, and who was the king at that time, or who was the judge. And it sets in a particular time and place, because they want you to say, this is a real person who really did something. Until you get to Jonah. The book of Jonah doesn't have any of that. That's a clue that the book of Jonah is a story, not a history. And once you realize that, you realize not only is it a story, it's a comic story. Jonah is the most absurd, ridiculous, stupid, gets it totally wrong. You read it and it's hilarious. And all the bits that don't work, you suddenly realize this is a satire. And then you learn what Jonah is trying to tell you. So there are clues that, an educated reader can figure out. But at the end of the day, you read two different histories of the same king and you're going to get two different messages. And guess what? There are two different sets of histories, even in the Hebrew Scripture. One written from the northern kingdom, one written from the southern, and the good guys in the one look like the bad guys in the other, because that's how histories work. And eventually, you might get it wrong. And if you eventually realize you got it wrong, you go, whoops, got it wrong. Don't be afraid of getting it wrong. Don't be satisfied with whatever understanding you've got.
I think we have time for two more questions we can get in.
Okay, so there was a Kaylee along with a Kylie. And so Kaylee McCarthy, you had a question.
Yes, so you were saying earlier that the universe is God's gift for us to explore. And so I guess part of that was also people are thinking about finding a new planet to inhabit or something like that. And so I guess would exploration of other planets and the preservation of our own go hand in hand, or do we have an obligation first to, like with climate change and everything that, like protect our own planet before we start thinking about other places?
I think the best analogy is to look at what the Europeans did when they came to the New World. Coming to the Americas, we introduced smallpox, which wiped out 90% of the people who lived here. We, all is smeared with trade, as the wonderful poem God's Grandeur says. And yet, it also did phenomenally good things, which allowed the human race to everything from confronting racism in a way that we might not have confronted otherwise, to providing a place where, we show that democracy actually is possible. It is never an unmitigated disaster, and it's never a completely pure good. That's what it means to be a human being. But I think on the whole, for all of the horrors that came with the Europeans, here I am, a descendant of Europeans, living in the Americas, and I'm glad I'm here. So I think in the long run, on the whole, we'll be glad to have the ability to look back at planet Earth and say, this is how planets work. That's why we don't want to do this on this particular planet. We really only understood in our guts the fragility of Earth when we were off the Earth and could look back at it. So it's not a one or the other. And finally, there was a guy who I interrupted who said he wanted to ask a question, and then I said that Kaylee came first.
Yeah, that was me.
Okay.
Hi. So earlier in the year, we read a paper about the importance of stupidity in science. And it stressed the idea that if you didn't feel stupid as a scientist, you were probably doing something wrong. So I was wondering what you thought about this, and if you could talk about your experience with stupidity in science.
Oh, absolutely. An awful lot of, the first level of stupidity is when something seems impossible and you're banging your head against the wall, and then you spend enough time with it and suddenly you get it. And it's so obvious you feel really stupid, like, why didn't I see that yesterday? That happened to me in physics. I was trying to learn freshman physics at MIT, and it was impossible. And I just, okay, I'm just going to put all the factors together so the units come out right. And, that's how you do that. That's easy. How come nobody ever told me that? But as soon as I tried to explain it to somebody else, they didn't learn it because they hadn't gone through that experience. A second level is not so much stupidity as stubbornness. If you know too much about a field, you're going to say, that'll never work. If you don't know that much, then you'll go ahead and make it work anyway. Sometimes they're right, it never will work. But on the road to discovering that it wouldn't work, you learn things you wouldn't have discovered otherwise. Science is a human activity. It's an art precisely because there's no formula that says, here is the problem. Of all the problems I want to try attacking, this is the problem that's the right one for me to do. This is the right approach. You don't know that's the right problem. I know a lot of grad students who start on a project and after 2 years realize this is going nowhere. I've got to find a different project. Or it's a good project, but their approach, it turns out, is all wrong. This approach won't work. There's a guy here at the Vatican Observatory who was brought in Paris to work on building an instrument that would fly in a spacecraft looking for other planets. And after 3 years of working on the instrument and talking with experts, not only in Paris, but also at JPL, he came back to his advisor and he says, there's a fundamental flaw in this design. This design isn't going to work. You feel stupid, but you've learned something. And he understands that design now better than he ever would have before. And he understands also what is it that we're actually looking for. The deeper issue is you can't afraid to be wrong. You can't afraid to be someone who makes mistakes. Progress comes from making mistakes. If you never make a mistake, you never. When I was an undergraduate at MIT, there was the Charles River flowing right by the MIT campus. I don't know if you've ever been there. And there are these boats, these sailboats, tech dinghies. Well, I grew up in the Great Lakes. I loved sailing. And I loved sailing in pretty rough weather. But in those days, the Charles River was so polluted that if you capsized, you immediately had to go to the health doctors and you get a tetanus shot. It's better now, but it was, you still get muddy as anything. The 3 years that I was on the MIT sailing team, I never capsized the boat once, and I never won a race once. And the two facts are correlated. You have to be willing to capsize in order to win. You have to be willing to be shown to be stupid in order to come into an insight that turns out wasn't so stupid. And Lord knows both have happened to me in my life.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up for the night. Brother Guy, thank you so much. Really amazing. Tolkien, George Manley Hopkins, science, it's all perfect. And students, honestly, great questions, just fantastic questions. You guys,
you've got some great students there. You're a lucky professor.
We are very lucky. We are very lucky here at the Abbey. Absolutely. This is a special crew. So thank you all. Thank you for coming on. Appreciate it. And we'll keep these conversations going. But have a good night, and we'll see you soon.